We are going to turn to American politics now because once again the United States is holding its breath for the prospect of renewed military action or the use of the military on America's own streets, this time in Chicago. President Trump late last night, amplified his promise to send National Guard troops and immigration agents to Chicago by posting a parody image from Apocalypse Now featuring a ball of flames as helicopters zoom over the nation's third largest city. I love the smell of deportations in the morning, President Trump wrote on Truth Social. Chicago is about to find out why it's called the Department of War. More on that in a second. The president offered no details beyond the label Chi-pocalypse Now, a play, of course, on the title of the 1979 film about the Vietnam War, in which a character says, among other things, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." In response to the post, Illinois Governor JB Pritzker, a Democrat, of course, called Trump a wannabe dictator. This is following the move that we saw earlier in the week of the Department of Defense being renamed by executive order by President Trump as the Department of War, reverting to the 1940s name, with Pete Hegseth now styling himself as the Secretary of War to remind America and the world of the United States' offensive abilities. Extraordinary stuff in every direction. Let's turn now to Jim Townsend, former Deputy Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO under Presidents Barack Obama and Joe Biden, and NATO policy at the Pentagon himself. Jim, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Let's just start with that, the renaming of the department. What do you make of it?
Well, it's silly. I don't know what they're trying to hide by focusing on a name change instead of focusing on all the problems we're having in terms of our military and trying to improve our defense. It's something that shows they're just not serious.
You know the Pentagon well, Department of Defense well. How do you think this will go down among defense officials?
Well, under MAGA defense officials, I'm sure they love it. But with the rank and file, and I was in the Pentagon for 35 years, for the rank and file, this is just there's a moaning, I'm sure, coming out of the Pentagon, is they're going to have to change tons of letterhead just to have the right stationery.
Emails, branding, everything.
Oh, it's everything, and it's millions of dollars at the end of the day because it's all the bases around the world. Everything's going to have to change, and so I'd rather the money go somewhere else than changing the letterhead. So it's just in the Pentagon, among everyone, they're just saying this is one more rock in their knapsack that they're going to have to carry around.
In the explanation for it, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth alluded to the idea that this is going to remind America's adversaries abroad, even its allies, other countries, about the true nature of the Department of Defense and America's offensive capabilities. What do you think they mean by that? And should we be worried by it?
Well, it's a horrible thing to try to put upon the global public that we're all about war, because we're not. We never have been. This is something that is not a good look for a president who is going to go after the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, this is exactly what you don't want to do if you're trying to pump for that. So this is not the kind of image that you get by changing your name. You get an image of being competent and strong as a military, and a military that deters, that doesn't become aggressive, but that deters because you're able to project that any attack on us would be a big mistake. It's not an image of invading your neighbor or doing some other things that the rhetoric coming out of the White House seems to foreshadow. I am certain that is not where we're going, and I'm certain that's not where the American people want to go. But these kinds of things certainly give that impression, and that doesn't help the world situation right now.
Meanwhile, you'll have heard President Trump suggesting that Chicago might get the same sort of treatment that Los Angeles has got, that Washington, D.C. has got, the deployment of the National Guard, him talking about a Chi-pocalypse, whatever that happens to mean. What do you make of this repeated use of the National Guard on America's own cities?
Well, that has certainly riled up this city where I am right now in Washington, D.C. I think you're here as well. And it's something that a lot of people don't realize in terms of Washington is that we're not a state. We're a federal enclave. We have no vote in the Congress, and the person that runs this town ultimately is the president of the United States, and it's the president who runs the D.C. National Guard. So we're helpless. But for Chicago or Baltimore, Los Angeles, it's not the case. And I think what's important here is this is going to challenge a lot of tightly held legal findings in terms of how one uses the military in terms of law enforcement. And this is a laws that go back to the end of the U.S. Civil War in the late 1860s. And something that's very much part of our heritage. And now that's going to be challenged, certainly in the Supreme Court. It's something that sends a chill through a lot of people in this country. Even if they're MAGA, I think they're going to be thinking twice when they see people on their streets, like Washington, carrying automatic weapons when there is no cause for this. There's no cause for the federal government to engage with some type of threat on the streets of the Capitol. It's just the crime is not there. And so this is something that is chilling, quite frankly, and we'll see what the courts say. But I certainly hope this is going to be something that the courts will halt before we have the National Guards of various states being sent to one another's state. Blue states get invaded by red states. This is something only Hollywood could come up with. And I'm hoping that the courts will keep us away from that situation.
Jim Townsend there, former Deputy Director of Defense for Europe and NATO under Presidents Obama and Joe Biden. We're also joined now by Joe Walsh, former Republican Congressman for Illinois, ran against President Trump for the Republican nomination in 2020. Joe Walsh, thanks so much for joining us this morning. You're from Illinois. The president is suggesting that he's going to send troops, National Guard troops, onto the streets of Chicago. Your reaction to that and this question of Chi-pocalypse, which is what he's tweeted overnight or what he's put on Truth Social overnight.
Look, a reminder, a clear reminder that Donald Trump's a horrible man. He's utterly un-American. Everything he's doing is un-American. Let's just be clear, we don't do this in America. We don't put troops on our streets. It's part of what our founders rebelled against. This is Trump's attempt, right, to set the tone. Look, he wants this to be normalized. He wants the American people to get used to seeing troops on the streets because Trump wants to screw around with our midterm elections. And I guarantee you he's going to use troops. He's going to try to use troops to prevent people from voting next year in 2026. He needs to be resisted by everyone.
You think that he will attempt to use the U.S. military to affect the results of the 2026 midterms?
I think he'll attempt to use the troops to keep himself in the White House after 2028. Look, the biggest failure we've had in these Trump years is a failure of imagination. We've never imagined how bad he'd get, how low he'd go. Did you think 30 years ago in America, a president would lose an election and refuse to accept the results and then commit crimes trying to overthrow that election? Hell, this guy will do anything to prevent next year's election from happening if it looks bad for Republicans. He's laughing about and talking about running again in 2028. Who knows what he'll do? We have to prepare for the worst.
Of course, much of the polling suggests that American voters actually support Trump's very, very hard line, even using National Guard in American cities to try and, as he says, clamp down on crime and law and order. How is you're making an effective, powerful argument against that, but his opponents don't seem to have landed that with the US voters.
They haven't. Democrats... Look, my new political party, they don't understand this moment. They have not met this moment, right? They've lacked the imagination to what Trump really is. Donald Trump is a fascist. He's using the military. He's trying to create his own private military. And Democrats have not really woken up to the seriousness of this moment yet on this issue of crime. Look, Trump got elected last year because most of the American people agreed with him on immigration because Democrats totally dropped the ball on immigration. Well, look what? Look now what Trump is doing now on immigration. Trump's numbers are tanking because this is not what the American people voted for. They thought they were voting for Trump getting violent criminals off of our streets. Well, now Trump is disappearing brown and black grandmothers off of our streets. And that's why his numbers are going down. The American people have always wanted us to be tough against crime, but they don't want the military on our streets. So if Trump continues to do this, I guarantee you the American people are not going to support it.
There's been a lot of speculation, clearly some of it ill-founded because there was speculation that he was dying, but there's been a lot of speculation about President Trump's health over the last couple of weeks. What do you make of that? And do you think that that the White House, again, we obviously saw one administration be less than honest about the president's health, an older president's health. Do you think the same thing is happening now?
We have no idea because, again, when it comes to Trump's health, they've never been transparent about his health. So we don't know the first thing. In his first term, they had some weird quack doctor who would issue weird statements every now and then saying he's the healthiest president America's ever had. He's as healthy as a 40-year-old. So no, we cannot believe anything about Donald Trump's health that they put out, and we don't know anything. Look, I oppose Trump, but I'm not one of these Trump opponents who even thinks or cares he might die in a week. He's a fascist in the White House. He stands against everything America stands for. That's what gets me riled up, and that's what's got to get the American people riled up. And I don't want to see people on the left saying, oh, I hope he dies. No, we need to defeat what he's doing.
Joe Walsh there, former Republican congressman for Illinois.